Now we have a special treat. John Quinones is the award-winning anchor of ABC News Magazine Primetime, as well as 2020, and has been with ABC News for nearly 25 years. He is the sole anchor of the primetime series, What Would You Do? It is one of the highest-rated news magazine programs of recent years. Now, during his career, he has won 7 National Emmy Awards for his Primetime Live, Burning Questions, and 2020 work. In addition, his work has won him many other awards, including an Alma Award from the National Council of La Raza, a World Hunger Media Award, a citation from the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Awards, a first prize in international reporting, a Robert F. Kennedy Prize, and he received an Outstanding Alumni Award from his alma mater, the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, in 2010. And as you're about to find out, he also happens to be a very nice guy. And he's one that we look up to and we're very proud of, Mr. John Quinones.
All right, Frank. Hello. Oh, man. Well, thank you. Good morning. How are you? Yes, I work for What Would You Do? You know that show, right? So you've been warned. We can put those cameras anywhere. So if the person next to you passes out and you step over them to go get a drink, you're going to have me to talk to. It's great to be here. Great to be introduced by Frank, who can pronounce Quinones so well, huh? I mean, it's not an easy name to pronounce. I mean, even Barbara Walters has trouble with Quinones. And so do people on the street. The other day I was in San Antonio, my hometown. I was the Grand Marshal of their river parade. And afterward, there was a big party. There was a big fiesta. And I don't know if you know Fiesta Week in San Antonio, but it's like Mardi Gras for Latinos in South Texas, and for everyone, actually. It's a big street celebration for 10 days. And a lot of tequila is drunk at this festival. So there I was with my buddy Sam Rodriguez, and we're having fun. And suddenly this girl runs up to me, and she's clearly had too many margaritas, and does not speak Spanish. She's blonde, beautiful, blue-eyed, and she runs up to me and goes, "I know you, you're that guy, right?" And I said, "Yes, it depends on who that guy is, but I think so." She goes, "Yes, I love What Would You Do, and I love 2020, and can I take a picture with you, Mr. Cojones?" Well, I didn't know whether to be insulted or flattered, right? I chose to be flattered. I said, "That's right. I'm Mr. Cojones to you." It was funny. Really great to be here. Great to be out of the blizzard in New York. Are you kidding? I want to stay in Arizona. I love the title of your session here, Positive Action Through Civic Engagement. I love that title because, in my opinion, progress in any communities, any neighborhoods, any barrios is impossible without that civic engagement. And breaking the sound of silence, which is the talk of our panel discussion, well, that's been the story of my life. I've been trying to shatter the silence ever since I was able to raise my voice. You see, a lot of people who watch me on television, on 2020, or on What Would You Do, or on Primetime, or on Good Morning America even, have no idea the long, hard, difficult, and often debilitating struggle that it took for John Quinones to get to network television. I was born in the barrio in San Antonio, in the poorest neighborhoods of the west side of San Antonio. You know how some people say we were poor, but we didn't know it? We knew we were poor. We had an old black and white television, and we saw how the other side lived. Spoke no English when I was 6 years old. My dad was a janitor, and my mother cleaned houses. She was a maid. They spoke no English either. To try to help the family, I would shine shoes when I was 8 years old on Guadalupe Street in San Antonio to help give something. I was 8 years old. And we would go shine shoes, my cousin Joey and I, to all the bars and the cantinas because the drunks didn't know how much they were tipping you. And that career ended one night when I was walking home and I was jumped by a gang in the neighborhood, and they stole all my shoe shining rags and my earnings from that night. And that was That was the end of my career in shoe shining. But you know, when I went to the first grade, there was no bilingual education. I never went to kindergarten or preschool. So consequently, and by the way, we're 7th-generation Texans, my family. I love it when people say, oh, you're Mexican-American. When did your family come from Mexico? I was like, we were always there, you know. Texas used to be part of Spain and Mexico. We didn't cross the border crossed us. But, you know, in San Antonio, you don't really have to learn English. All the neighborhoods, all the stores, the radio stations, everything was in Spanish. So when I go to school, the first grade, the first day of class, the teacher, of course, doesn't speak Spanish, and I had no idea what she was saying because I only spoke Spanish. So I'm sitting there the first day of class, and at 10 in the morning, the school bell rings, of course, and the kids run to the playground for recess. Where does little Juanito Quinones go? I went home. I lived 2 blocks from the school. So I go home. My mother, my wonderful mother Maria, goes, Juanito, ¿qué pasó? What's up? What are you doing here? And I said, I'm home, Mom. It's over. Se acabó. I love school, Mom. 2 hours and you're out of there. She grabbed me by the ear and dragged me back to class. It was tough. When I was 13 years old, my father was laid off from his job as a janitor, and we became migrant farm workers. So from South Texas, we joined a caravan of trucks. And I remember being in the back of this big truck, traveling for 3 days to Michigan, where we picked cherries in Northport, Michigan, just north of Traverse City. My parents and my 2 sisters and I. And it taught me a lot about the family working together. I mean, we would get paid 75 cents a bucket of cherries, and it took a long day to fill that bucket. And then we followed the crops, and we went to pick tomatoes in Ohio, outside Toledo, Ohio. And 35 cents a bushel for those tomatoes. And I was a champion tomato picker. With these hands, man, I did 100 bushels a day. And for the family, that meant a lot. You know, we helped us get over that hump that summer. But I'll never forget being on my knees on the cold, dark ground at 6 in the morning, looking at a row of tomato plants that for a 13-year-old boy's eyes looked like they went on for miles and miles. And my father, Bruno, looking down and saying, Juanito, do you want to do this kind of work for the rest of your life, or do you want to get an education? It was a no-brainer. Of course I wanted an education, but I knew I couldn't ask them. No one in my family, first of all, had ever gone to college, and we had no money. But thank God we discovered a program called Upward Bound. Have you heard of Upward Bound? It is sort of a remedial classes that the government gave to kids from the inner city to prepare them better for school, for college. They knew that the inner city schools were not doing a great job to those of us in those barrios. So part of the Kennedy administration, Johnson administration war on poverty the theory was that the way out of poverty was through education. What a thought. And I was one of the lucky kids who qualified for Upward Bound, and every Saturday I would take remedial classes in math and English and biology, and every summer I would go to class for 6 weeks. And thank God for Upward Bound, I wouldn't be standing here today. I had a dream. I wanted to be a reporter. Ever since I was a little boy, I used to watch Geraldo Rivera on 2020, back when he was doing real news. No, I kid. He's talking about running for Senate, I think, in New Jersey. But Geraldo was a hero. He was the only one on television with a Hispanic last name. And I knew, though, that if I was going to be like Geraldo, I had to get rid of my accent. I had a really heavy Mexican accent, as many of us do. You know, there is no SH sound, for example, in Spanish. So I would say my choose, my churt, and people would make fun of that. And I knew that if I was going to be like Geraldo, I would have to get rid of my accent. So I got involved in something that I was very bashful. Believe it or not, I was really shy as a kid. But I knew I had to push myself. So I enrolled in drama classes at my junior high school. And I played Romeo in Romeo and Juliet on a stage like this. The good news was that I got to kiss Juliet. The bad news is that in this very macho Mexican school, I had to wear leotards. So there are still pictures of me traipsing around as Romeo in leotards, but that helped me enunciate and get rid of my accent. I got into college thanks to upward bound. And while in college, I had 3 jobs. I worked in the geology department, sorting rocks at the university, at St. Mary's University. I worked in the cafeteria. And at night, I was a drugstore delivery man. But again, wanting to get into broadcasting, I would read whatever I could get a hold of and record it on this little tape recorder. I would read newspapers, anything. And at the drugstore where I worked, the owner of that drugstore found out, he could hear me in the bathroom recording my voice. He said, John, I know the general manager at a radio station here. I was 19 years old. And he said, if you want to get involved, they're looking for interns. So he turned me on. The good news was that I was going to get an internship at this radio station. The bad news was that it was a country music station. And I was 19. I liked rock music and Tejano music. But it was a job. And believe it or not, that was my first big break. So one of the chores at that radio station was the disc. You have to be from Texas to understand this, but the disc jockeys at this country music station had horses in the back of the studios that they would use in parades and rodeos and public appearances. My first job, my big job in broadcasting, was to feed the horses at the back of the studio for $2 an hour. But at night I would get to go into the studio and record my voice in a real professional recorder and practice. And at midnight, this was after everyone was gone, I would be there reading newspapers and just working on my delivery. But at that hour, everyone was gone, so the only one I could have comment on my work was the janitor. And his name was Pablo. So I'd pull him into the studio and say, Pablo, what do you think? How does this sound? He'd go, más o menos, more or less, it sounds okay. And then they let me do, finally, commercial tags on the air. So the first thing I got to do on the air as a reporter or an announcer, well, you know how there are these nationally produced commercials for some new medicine, and they let me do this at the end of the commercial for 4 seconds. I got to say this. I got to say, now available at Walgreens. No? I was so proud, man. How did that sound? Would you buy that? I was so excited. I would call my mother and my relatives. You got to listen at 1:12 this afternoon. But don't blink because you'll miss it. And then they let me do the news on Sunday nights between 2 in the morning and 4. We had 4 listeners, my mother, my father, and my 2 sisters. But I made mistakes, and I got to learn broadcasting. From there, I got a job as the all-night newsman at KTSA, the rock station in San Antonio. And then I got a better job in Houston. You know, you slowly climb your way up in this long, hard struggle. And in Houston, I got to do stories for the county and then the courts and the commissioner's court in that city. And again, breaking the silence. I got to do stories that maybe no one else, people were overlooking. Maybe someone who didn't speak Spanish could go into those neighborhoods like I did and finally tell the stories that needed to be told. The reason I wanted to break the silence, I wanted to be a reporter, because when I was a kid, everything you would watch on television was about Hispanics, was about gangs and violence, illegal immigration. There was nothing positive, and I knew there were positive stories in our neighborhoods. I worked as a reporter in Houston, and then I wanted to get into television. Remember, I wanted to be like Geraldo, so no one would hire me in Texas because I was a radio reporter and I had no experience in television. And I was about ready to give up. And here's a message to the young people in the audience. Never take no for an answer. I was at the point of maybe going to law school and giving up journalism, until I met a woman who had gone to Columbia University, this Ivy League school in New York. And she said, John, I can see the passion you have for journalism. Why are you going to give up that and go to law school? If you want to go back to school, why don't you go to Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism, the best journalism school in the world, she said. And I'll write a letter recommending you. So I did, and not only did I get in, but I got a fellowship to study in New York at Columbia University for my master's. So like the Beverly Hillbillies, I packed a U-Haul trailer from San Antonio and drove to New York, had a wonderful time there. And from Columbia, I got a job in Chicago as a local TV reporter, which is unheard of. You don't start in Chicago. You start in Peoria, you know, in a small town. Peoria, Illinois, not a big city like Peoria, Arizona. So And while I was in Chicago, I did a story that I'd wanted to do for a long time. I know immigration is a hot button issue everywhere these days, and it still is, and it was back then. So I told my news director, let me do a story about immigration where I go undercover and I am one of the guys who crosses from Mexico. I wanted to see what are the push factors that make people risk their lives crossing your desert here, crossing the Rio Grande, to get a job that pays so little money. How desperate must they be? So I convinced my news director to let me come down to Laredo, Texas, on the border, and go undercover. I told my friends, I'm going to go undercover. I'm going to pose as a Mexican. And they're like, John, it's not going to take great acting ability. You know you are Mexican. But I wanted to be posed as a Mexican citizen trying to get into the U.S. So I spoke only Spanish, and I found a coyote, a smuggler, who for $300 sold me a fake birth certificate and a fake Social Security card to swim across the Rio Grande. So it was all set up with him. He thought I was just another guy, another immigrant trying to get across the river. So I said, okay. He says, meet me here tonight at 7 p.m. I said, all right. He said, bring a little plastic bag because you have to take your clothes off and swim through the river. So I said, all right. So we captured all that on hidden camera. And then I went over to the Texas side of the border, crossed the river, crossed the bridge, found my camera crew, and I said, guys, okay, tonight we're going to be crossing here. They're hiding in the bushes on the Texas side. And then I go back to Mexico, and I met up with the smuggler, and fortunately he was a decent smuggler. You know, these guys can beat you up, rob you, leave you for dead on the banks of the Rio Grande, and who would care? You're just another immigrant down there. But he was a decent guy who put me on an inner tube and then floated me across the Rio Grande, all captured on hidden cameras from the Texas side of the border. And not only did we didn't stop there. I then got on a bus and went to Chicago, because remember, I was doing this for the Chicago station. And I got a job as a dishwasher at a restaurant where the owner of the restaurant had not paid his 7 Mexican workers in 13 weeks. They lived in the basement. And every time they would complain, he would say, okay, you want to complain? I'll call immigration, and I'll have you deported. You get to eat here, you get to sleep in the basement, what are you complaining about? So I got a job at that restaurant as a dishwasher, speaking only Spanish, right? So by day I was washing the dishes with him, and then at night I went down to the basement to sleep with the other immigrant workers. And I still wonder what they must have thought. You know, there I was, by day I'm one of their fellow workers speaking only Spanish, and at night I whip out this little camera and I start interviewing them about their lives. And they told me everything. And the next day, I come back to the restaurant, this time wearing a suit, speaking fluent English with a camera crew behind me. I remember the owner of the restaurant, I had to chase him through the parking lot because he didn't want to talk about what he had done to these workers. After that story aired on CBS that night, the restaurant was shut down. The Mexican workers got their money back, and they were allowed to stay in this country temporarily as they worked on their visas and their permissions to stay. And I knew then that those were the kinds of stories that I wanted to tell. I wanted to shine a light on the darkness. Imagine this room pitch dark. No one can see anything, your hand in front of you. And the journalist is the person with a flashlight or a candle who can shine it on the darkest corners of this room to illuminate injustice, to illuminate human rights violations, corruption. I think when journalism is done right, that's what we should be doing. And we don't always get it right, by the way. But when we do, that's what we should be doing. I loved telling that story. And I never forget my producer, who's now at 60 Minutes, on that border story. He said, John, you're the first Mexican to swim across the Rio Grande and then go to his suite at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. It won an Emmy. It was 1980s. Central America was blowing up. Nicaragua, El Salvador, there were wars going down in Panama, Guatemala, Honduras. And ABC had had a correspondent who was covering that region for Peter Jennings, who was covering that region and didn't speak a word of Spanish. He was plucked out of New York in 1981, I believe, sent down to cover the war in Nicaragua. And he didn't speak Spanish, so he picked up a translator at the airport who said, I speak English, I can work for you. And the guy said, okay, $100 a day, you're hired. And we often did that in countries where we didn't speak the local language. But this was dangerous. This was Nicaragua, and there was a war going on with the rebels. Well, they're stopped at a military checkpoint, and Bill Stewart, the correspondent for ABC News, is pulled out of the car and the van with his translator and everyone else, the camera crew, and they start questioning them. And the soldiers look at Bill Stewart and say, "Who is this guy?" Bill hadn't realized that the translator he had hired had long hair, was wearing blue jeans, was 21 years old. He looked like the rebels that the government was fighting. He looked like the enemy to these soldiers. So they take the translator behind a hill, and they shoot him and they kill him, unbeknownst to Bill Stewart, who's now left there trying to communicate with the soldiers. And he says the camera crew is about 50 yards away, and they don't know that the translator's been shot, so they think it's funny that Bill Stewart can't communicate with the soldiers, so they start rolling on it. They start recording. And on camera, you see Bill Stewart being told to get on his knees, and the soldiers putting a gun to his head and assassinate him. The camera crew barely got out of there with their lives. The story hit the airwaves. You know, we never share our information with the competition. We never give copies of our story to CBS or NBC or CNN. But that day they did, because they wanted the story to get out. And as soon as it did and it made the evening news, the White House withdrew support for President Somoza, the dictator in Nicaragua, and that government fell. But I tell you this long story to explain that the networks then, in all their wisdom, said, we should hire somebody who speaks Spanish to go to Central America. And there I was with my shiny new Emmy in Chicago, raring to go, and I was the youngest correspondent hired by ABC News to work out of Miami, and I spent 10 years traipsing about Central America and Brazil and Cuba and all of that region. And I told some amazing stories, again, breaking the silence. I remember I was trying to interview the president of Nicaragua one day, and I called New York. He had said, yes, I'm going to give you an interview. So they were expecting it on World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Suddenly, the president in Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, pulls out, and he says, I'm not going to do the interview. Now I have to call New York and tell Peter Jennings that the story he thought he was going to get wasn't coming after all. Peter could be, remember Peter Jennings, wasn't he the greatest anchorman? We were just talking about him. We really miss him dearly. He could be very intimidating. You know, and I was only 26 years old. I was the cub reporter. Now I have to tell him that the story he was going to get is not going to happen. So I told him that, expecting to be yelled at on the phone down in Nicaragua. But instead, Peter said some words that I'll never forget. He said, John, don't worry so much about talking to the movers and the shakers in this world. You should concentrate on talking to the moved and the shaken. In other words, talk to the real people. Politicians, the presidents of corporations, they can always hold a press conference. They can gather the media, they can get their message out, they can issue a press release. Real people, the victims of war, the victims of hurricanes, the victims of earthquakes, they don't have a voice often, and your job should be to give them a voice. I followed that edict for years down in Central America, doing many, many stories for Peter Jennings. But I wanted to tell stories also that were longer, you know, like on the magazine shows like 2020 or Primetime back then. And they wouldn't let me do those stories because I was a regular news reporter for the evening news. But when I was in Colombia, South America, covering the elections down there, I knew I had a big story that could break into prime time. Because again, I wasn't one of the original reporters that was hired and given that prestigious job. I was just a regular reporter for the evening news. So anyway, I'm down there, and while we're doing the story on the elections in Colombia for president, I saw a bunch of kids on the streets of the capital of Bogota who would sniff glue by day, and at night they would open the manhole covers on the streets of the capital and run into the sewers. And I said to the woman who worked for us down there, who are those kids and what are they doing? And she said, oh, we call them gamines. They're not good kids. You know, they're thieves by day. They steal necklaces and watches from tourists. They're runaways, castaways, some of them as young as 7, 8 years old, and they live in the sewer. And I said, they live in this, she says 300 of them. And the military is trying to get rid of them, she said. They're trying to clean up the streets, but they're afraid to go down in the sewers because that is the kids' dark world. No one else will go down there. By the way, it's full of filth and disease. So the cops won't go down there. But what they do is they open the manhole covers now and then. They pour gasoline down there and they throw a match in there to burn them out. And I said, who's doing anything for these kids? She said, there's one man, a wealthy industrialist in Colombia. His name is Jaime Jaramillo. And Jaime says he can't sleep at night, knowing that his fellow countrymen, the youngest of his fellow countrymen, sleep in these conditions and live like this. So he goes down there every other night with a loaf of bread and a bucket of chicken and a six-pack of Cokes, and he tries to help the kids, and he's trying to start an orphanage for these kids. And I knew I had to tell that story. So I called New York, and I said, listen, this is an amazing story. 300 kids. They're called sewer kids, they call them, because they live in the sewers. I really want to tell this story. And they said, John, I remember the people in New York, my ABC folks telling me, if you're crazy enough to go into the sewers to tell the story about these kids, who are we to stop you and say no to that story? So we did. We went down there and we documented the lives of 300 kids who lived in the sewers. We met a baby, a 6-week-old infant that had been born to a 16-year-old girl in the sewer just a couple of weeks before, 6 weeks before. We told the story of Jaime trying to help these kids and pull them out of there. And when the story aired on Primetime Live on ABC, the next day we got hundreds of phone calls saying, from American viewers like yourself, saying, we want to help those kids. And Jaime Jaramillo and his orphanage got $1 million in donations. And it wasn't long before all the kids were pulled out of the sewers. By the way, some of the pictures we saw, some of the kids we met had their faces melted because they had been burned by the military and the cops trying to flush them out. Jaime Jaramillo built an orphanage called Los Niños de los Andes, the Children of the Andes. And now those kids are doing extremely well. They're taking tennis lessons in Florida and skiing in Colorado and have a great life. Again, because of the power of this medium, that camera that can document and tell stories that can bring justice. Those are the kinds of stories I want to do. It won another Emmy Award, and then I wanted to work for Primetime. They still wouldn't hire me. They said, okay, bring other ideas to us. So then I went to the Amazon, and I did a story on the Yanomamo Indian tribe, a tribe that had never been visited by the outside world. We documented their lives about how they hadn't invented the wheel yet. They had never heard music. They were a tribe of hunters and gatherers. We told their story. That won an Emmy. They still wouldn't hire me at Primetime. Then I went to Haiti, and I did a story about children who are kidnapped at the Haitian border with the Dominican Republic and then forced to work on sugarcane plantations for the rest of their lives. They're told they're going to get great jobs, these kids, and then they wind up being modern-day slaves in the Dominican Republic. And guess who buys that sugar? We do. American companies buy the sugar produced by slaves. I told that story. I remember after it aired, the ambassador to from the Dominican Republic in Washington held a press conference to accuse me of lying and told the world that I had hired actors to play the part of sugarcane cutters, little children, to tell my story. Of course that it was not true. The next week, a priest from Haiti drove into the sugarcane fields of the Dominican Republic and rescued, I think, 900 children who had been stranded there. Again, the power of the media, and it won another Emmy. And finally, ABC said, John, why don't you join Primetime Live? And I was there for 10 years, traveling the world, covered, interviewed everyone from Fidel Castro in Cuba to Jane Goodall in Africa. Remember, she was the one who spent 30 years studying chimpanzees in Tanzania. It's been a wonderful, wonderful ride, doing all kinds of stories. But my heart is still in Latin America. So whenever a story breaks down there, I want to be a part of it. For example, when the Chilean miners got stranded, remember, in that deep mine a couple of years ago, I wanted to go down there, and I convinced ABC News New York. I was doing What Would You Do Then? And they said, no, of course you can go down there. So I went down there, and there were 2,000 journalists. Guess who got the first interview with the first survivor? I did. And it's because I spoke the language, I understood the customs. And it's more than just speaking the language. It's understanding mannerisms and customs and being polite. There were 2,000 journalists clamoring with these families, demanding that they talk to them. And of course, that didn't work. But I interviewed Mario Sepulveda, who was one of the miners, who was sort of the clown and the entertainer inside that mine down there, who kept their spirits alive of these 69 miners who had been stranded there for 33 days. 33 miners who had been stranded for 69 days. And he kept their spirits up. So I interviewed him, and I did this great interview. And after the interview, I'll never forget asking him, okay, Mario, what would you like to do now? And he said, well, John, I've been in a mine for 3 months without any air. I want to go to the beach. So we took him to the beach, and he took his 8-year-old son, and he runs to the beach. The cameras were rolling on them, and they dropped to their knees, he and his son, to say thanks to God. I still have a picture of the sun's rays beaming down on them, and it was almost biblical. It was beautiful. But then Mario Sepulveda, this hero of the miners, tells his little boy to run away, to move aside, and Mario strips butt naked and runs into the beach to surf. And of course, we're rolling on it, so we had to fudge his rear end so it wouldn't make air. So my heart is still down there. I'm going to Ecuador in 2 weeks to do another story in a little town called Cuenca, Ecuador. But, of course, the show that's brought me more notoriety than anything has been What Would You Do? Who would have thought? I can't go anywhere now without people saying, all right, where are the cameras? I can't be at a restaurant having dinner. They think, I'm going to break the scene and someone's going to do something. So you've watched the show, I take it. And I brought a clip of the show if you want to see one. You want to? This one had to do with a homeless person being brought into a restaurant. What would you do if if the bartender or the waiter is refusing them service, even though they have money, simply because of the way they're dressed? So Manny, if you can roll the tape.
They are those among us with the least. Almost 500,000 people who call the streets home. Their meals, whatever they can find, whatever they are given.
Help me out, get something to eat.
What would you do if you saw a good Samaritan give a homeless man $20 for a bite to eat?
You get whatever you want, okay?
Only to see him tossed back to the curb the second she leaves.
It's bad for business. I can't let you sit in here.
A man denied service simply because he's homeless.
Today, we've brought our hidden cameras to the streets of Lynbrook, New York, and McQuaid's restaurant. Of course, both Tracy and Kevin are actors, and the bartender, Jeremy,
It's not your money. Get out of here.
he's definitely an actor. Everyone at this bar knows it, except this man, and our hidden cameras are rolling.
Oh, wow, it's nice in here.
Hi, this is a friend of mine. Do you have a menu or something he can look at? Just get it whatever you want, okay? Here's $20.
It's really, really nice.
Right away, he takes notice.
Take care, okay?
Thank you so
I have to
much.
get back to work.
But as soon as Tracy leaves, Jeremy has a change of heart.
Listen, man, you have places that you can go and you can get it like a soup kitchen or something.
I'm a paying customer. Look, I mean, I got $20.
That's not your money. I don't want you to bother these paying
I'm
customers.
not bothering anybody.
Okay?
Am I bothering you?
Then why don't you leave? He's being polite.
Perhaps, but for Oleg Babsky, this is about more than manners.
Yeah, but you took his $20.
Not his $20.
His $20, you gave it to him for him to eat. I heard it.
Okay, but if I give this 20 back to him, what's he gonna do?
Whatever he wants to do, it's his money.
He's gonna go buy liquor.
He wanted to eat. That's what he's looking for.
We've barely begun here, but already a bold move.
Who you calling?
Please.
You're calling the police on me?
Yeah.
He makes it clear to Jeremy it's meal or no deal.
Give him back the 20.
Thank you.
Not everyone is quite so welcoming.
Uh-oh, we got a homeless guy outside.
But now the homeless guy is inside.
Do you have a menu that I can look at?
These two women don't want a homeless man seated anywhere near them.
These ladies, and I can smell you too, you smell.
And when Jeremy intervenes, they offer an alternative.
He's bothering you, right?
But let him take something to go to eat.
But he shouldn't sit here, right?
No.
I'll be outside, okay, sir?
Sorry about that, lady.
No, it's fine. Right when the kid, big smell.
Hope that didn't ruin your appetite.
No.
Tough day for Kevin. These next two men also give him the cold shoulder.
Am I bothering you guys? I'm just trying to get something to eat.
These guys work, right? They work all their lives. They pay for their food.
They won't even look our homeless man in the face.
Excuse me.
He's not getting involved here.
Yeah.
You can't. We don't own the place.
Imagine you're down on your luck.
Sir,
Help a guy out.
Sir, mind your own business.
Thank you guys.
With his pleas falling on deaf ears, we tell Kevin to leave.
Sorry, guys. You feed him once, you feed him twice, then there's 20 guys sitting here.
Absolutely.
They agree with Jeremy. Why?
I think it was wrong for a lady to walk in here, bring a homeless guy in here. If that's her friend, take the money and buy a sandwich somewhere.
But not here.
Wrong place.
Wrong place. And as this next man walks in, things only get worse.
Run him through the dishwasher in the back.
Yeah. Just want to get a little bit of food.
Don't cough on everything.
Sorry.
Along with Jeremy, he literally laughs at Kevin's misfortune.
Can I please get a sandwich?
No.
Oh my God. Give the guy a couple of croutons that are on the floor in the kitchen or something.
I'm a paying customer, man.
Here's the thing. I don't work at a soup kitchen. I work in a bar, okay? When you go...
It seems like he couldn't care less about our homeless man. But then he realizes there's more at stake here.
Can you give me my money back then, please?
You confiscated
I'm not going to give you the money back.
Give the guy his money. You got to give him his money back at least. If he gets caught somewhere else, whatever.
You going to buy booze with this?
No.
Now watch what happens when Kevin leaves the restaurant.
I just don't think homeless people should be allowed in bars, you know? How did he end up here? He wasted his money.
Well, I mean, we don't know that. We don't know that.
That's true.
I mean, he looks like a decent guy.
A decent guy. And as it turns out, so is Anthony Gambino.
Do me a favor, make the guy a sandwich and put it on my bill, right?
Make him a sandwich and put
Make
it
him
on?
a sandwich.
Okay.
Kevin, you're still standing by out there, right?
Yeah.
This guy said he just wants to buy you a sandwich.
You're kidding me. That guy?
What kind of sandwich should I get him? Turkey burger?
Turkey burger. Nah, he needs a little something more than that.
More than that.
Yeah, that's for Weight Watchers. Get him the short skirt steak tacos.
A lot of protein in that.
100%.
And now Anthony, a man who seconds ago was insulting Kevin, hand delivers his meal.
Hungry? Here you go, pal.
Serious?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, enjoy. Beer or something?
Before he buys him a round of drinks, time to introduce ourselves.
Started off joking with the guy.
Yeah, I was messing around with him. Just trying to rile him up a little bit on his first day.
And then you wind up doing something that totally surprised us.
You know, I've had some hard times in my life, and, you know, other people were there for me, you know, so I try and do the same thing.
Paying it forward. This next man understands that concept all too well as soon as he sees Kevin on the street.
Thanks, bud.
Look, you can just sit right here.
Seconds later, Kevin is seated right next to him.
I want you to bother anybody. I don't want you to bother this nice
He didn't bother me.
Thank you.
Why don't you have some soup? If you've never been there, you don't know what it's like.
Well, I work, you know.
Yeah, we all work. All of us are at their times.
Can I get like a glass of water? Just water?
You want the free thing on the menu?
A small request that leads to a touching moment.
Thank you.
Now you're making him give you his drink.
No, don't worry about it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
To your health.
To yours too.
Thanks.
Better times.
But from Jeremy, the insults just keep getting worse.
Sure, there's a hose out there somewhere.
You don't have to be cruel, man.
Want me to be cruel? Get out of here. Hope you enjoyed your water.
Why'd you take the money, buddy?
And you know what he's going to do? He's going to buy drugs and alcohol with you.
He may, but you can't take that money from him. You take that money from him and you'll steal it, and I will make sure that you get arrested for it.
Why are you defending a homeless guy?
Because you're a prick.
Thank you.
Kevin leaves.
Sorry if it upset you. I hope I did the right thing.
No, you didn't.
And Arnie Gerber is full of emotion.
You think I was wrong?
Absolutely. Completely wrong. You never had been in bad shape. You never had you needed help. You never had anything happen to you that you wish you didn't or you wish you could get out of. Well, we don't know what happened to this fucking man.
It's a message that's very personal to Arnie.
And you said to him, haven't you ever been through hard times?
Haven't we all? Well, everybody's been through hard times. And we survive them in some way. And if somebody helps you and gives you a push-up, fine.
Almost half of the people we met this day did just that. They spoke up for a hungry stranger down on his luck. Heroes? They don't think so.
Heroic is the guy that landed the plane in the Hudson River. That's heroic. And wouldn't anybody else do the same thing?
Thank you. You know, we see these things and it just blows me away sometimes. We've done more than 300 different scenarios and you're constantly surprised. I mean, people tell me they're inspired by the heroes like that man, but also when people don't do something, they want to throw something at the TV set. And the scenarios we do are all kinds of scenarios. Some of them are fun. I don't know if you saw the bike theft scenario, where we tied a bike to a chain at a park, where people are jogging by, and we had an actor pretend that he was going to steal the bike, right? And we told the actors, if they ask you, if people ask you, be upfront with them, because we want them to know that you're stealing. So first we sent this actor, young guy, white guy with a cap and a base, 23 years old, and he's got a hacksaw and some wire cutters, and he's cutting into the chain. And people are asking, jogging by, you know, pushing their strollers, walking their dogs, and they say, are you stealing that bike? And with the white actor, he said, yeah, I'm stealing it. It's been here a while, I need a bike, you know. People would only shake their heads, but no one called 911, right? No one did with the white actor. So then we switch actors, and we have an African-American actor with a hacksaw and the wire cutters, dressed the same way, same age. He's cutting into the chain. Within 4 seconds, people not only call 911, but they start taking his picture with their cell phones, saying, we got you now. Even the actor was like, John, this is ridiculous. The white guy got away with it. And then, as a final twist, we had a very attractive, sexy young woman, blonde hair blowing in the wind, shorts and a T-shirt with a hacksaw and the wire cutters. Men helped her steal the bike. There was one middle-aged couple, and they're going by, and the husband tells his wife, they're on bicycles, and he tells his wife, I'm going to go help her. And she goes, honey, she says, she's stealing that bike, you know that? He goes, yes, but she's a damsel in distress. She needs help. So he's pulling the bike out of the pole, and of course we tell the actress to play along, so she's saying, you're so strong, and he goes, yes. And then she asks him, you don't see any cops around. So now he's looking around for police. He's her accomplice. I still wonder what the drive home with his wife must have been like that day. But the touching ones are those that remain with me. We did one about what would you do if you're walking down the sidewalk and the person in front of you suddenly collapses, right? You don't know why. You're in a hurry. It's 8 in the morning. You're trying to make a train. We did it in Newark, New Jersey at the train station, right outside the train station where people are, you know, trying to get to work or get to school at 8 in the morning. So sure enough, when we did it with a well-dressed, middle-aged woman in a business suit, and she faints, she was an actress, within 4 seconds, people rescued her. They put a coat over her. It was cold. They put a pillow on her head, and everyone called 911 for her. So then we said, what if we switch, this is pretty impressive, what if we switch things up though? And we have a homeless guy, older man, disheveled, and holding a beer can. What happens if he suddenly falls? So we did it with an older, again, stunt actor. He drops in the sidewalk, 88 people go by, and no one called 911. People were stepping over him. One lady made the sign of the cross, and she kept going. And we're about ready to give up. And I said, I guess if you're homeless, people won't look out for you that much. And we're about ready to give up, and we're watching, because I'm always hiding behind, you know, some wall, looking at the monitors. And we see this into the screen suddenly. First we hear the tapping of a walking cane on the sidewalk. And we say, what's that? And into the picture comes this wonderful woman who's partially paralyzed and homeless herself. And she happens to be African American. She stops to the homeless guy. And the homeless guy, by the way, is white. So not that that should matter. So then she starts asking people going by, you know, excuse me, does anyone have a cell phone? Do you see this man is down? Can someone call an ambulance? Can someone call 911? 22 more people go by and no one calls. She finally bends over, and again, she's been paralyzed, so she stumbles over and she does something that really surprised us. She takes the beer can out of his hand and she stumbles over to the trash can and puts it away, as if to give this man some dignity, right? And still no one stops. And then she bends over again and she goes, sir, I don't know your name, but my name is Linda, and I'm going to call you Billy. And Billy, don't you worry, man. I'm going to stay right here until help comes. And she was rubbing his hair. We could hear this because he was wearing a wireless mic. Well, then, finally, a woman stopped. And by the way, usually it's women who step into the scenarios before men. She stops and calls 911. So then I come out with the cameras and we say, it's okay, we've already alerted the authorities. There's no emergency here. He's an actor. And the excitement of trying to get releases signed and people interviewed, we lose our hero. Linda, her name is Linda Hamilton, our hero walks away and she disappears. Well, we told the story anyway. We put What Would You Do on the air 2 weeks later. And again, when the story airs, hundreds of emails and phone calls. People created a Facebook page for this woman, calling it Touched by an Angel, Touched by Linda Hamilton. And they started raising money for her. So now I've got $8,000 that people want me to deliver to this woman. We don't even know where she lives. So we spent 2 weeks with her picture in Newark, New Jersey, in bars and liquor stores and train stations and homeless shelters looking for Linda Hamilton. Have you seen this woman? And finally, we found her. So I show up with my little laptop to show her the piece because obviously she had never seen the piece on television. And I said, Linda, we met her at a church, and I said, this is pretty amazing, the stir you caused. Do you remember me? And she goes, yes, you were the guy on the sidewalk. I said, yes. Well, that was all part of the show, and we featured you, and here's a video. And she watches it, and she goes, wow, that's you. I said, yes, I'm the host of the show. And then she goes, oh, and that's me. And I said, yes. People are calling you a hero. They've given us $8,000. We're going to get you Medicaid, which you need and you qualify for. We got her a place to live. And then we gave her what she was most proud of, a cell phone, her own cell phone. So I said, now, Linda, she was jumping up and down like a 9-year-old with her first cell phone saying, I said to her, now you can call 911 when you need help. And I said, Linda, but they're calling you an angel, a hero. Are you really? And she goes, John, I'm not a hero. Let me tell you what happened. She goes, I think God put me on that corner, on that sidewalk, on that day, so that I could teach your viewers a lesson, to do for others what you would want them to do for you. So this morning I leave you with the thoughts from Linda Hamilton. When you see something on the street that bothers you, that disturbs you, and the little voice in the back of your mind says, do something, remember Linda Hamilton, this woman who was paralyzed, homeless herself, and she stopped and helped a man who was down simply because, as we say in Spanish, her corazón, her heart, told her it was the right thing to do. Thank you very much for having me here. All right, it was a pleasure. If you have any questions, we have microphones here, and we can talk about the show or ABC or my life. Any questions at all that you might have. The show, by the way, is coming back. ABC just told me they want it back May 29th. So we're going to have to get busy filming new scenarios for What Would You Do? And it'll be on Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock Arizona time. I think there's a lady there. How do we come up with our ideas and the scenarios? Yeah, we have a staff of about 30 people on What Would You Do? And we brainstorm. And we all kick around ideas. Honestly, after the first year, I thought we'd run out of ideas. But somehow we've been able to stay on top of things. We read the news. We watch what's happening. If internet bullying is an issue, we'll do a segment about that. If the morning after pill is an issue, we'll do a scenario about that. So we try to keep it timely. And we also have a contest where we ask people, our viewers, to send in ideas for what we should be doing. And last time we did that, we got 12,000 ideas. And we had to read through them all, and the 5 winners were flown to New York and spent the day with us as we filmed their scenario. So we get the ideas from everywhere, from what's happening in current events and from viewers like yourself. Yes?
In light of all of the talk at the government level about mental health in America and some of the challenges we're facing, do you have any plans to do any stories around mental health and support and really looking at the discrimination of people with mental health issues?
Yeah, that's a really big one. We want to do one, but we want to do it sensitively. You mean for what would you do as a scenario? Yeah. We did one about a child at a restaurant who's autistic, and then we did one with someone who's not Down syndrome. So it's difficult to do without. We have to do it really sensitively. We don't want anybody to get upset. So yeah, now that we have a new commission of 90 more stories to do, we're going to be looking at everything, and that's a great idea. That's a good one. Yeah. Someone else? Yes.
So obviously everyone says treat others the way you'd want to be treated.
Right.
Stuff like that. Treat everyone the same. Obviously, I'd be ignorant to think that that actually happens because it doesn't. But I was wondering, has there ever been a time in your life where somebody treated you disrespectfully where it affected you to where you wanted to stop doing what you did?
Well, early on, yeah. I mean, now that I'm a reporter and people know me, it's always really nice, usually, treatment. But when I was a kid and we were picking those cherries in Michigan, we were dirty and we had just come out of the cherry fields and we were trying to get a bite to eat in this little town called Northport, Michigan. And they wouldn't let us eat in the restaurants because we were migrants and they didn't want to serve us. So that sticks with you. I mean, I was only 13 years old, but it just never leaves you. That I remember, of course. And then in my career, it's always been a struggle. As I related in my talk, I was always told that I was a good radio reporter, that I would never make it in television, and there were all these hurdles that we had to come. I had to get a master's degree from an Ivy League school to get a TV job in Chicago. In the end, I think it's better to be more qualified than not, and I'm so glad I did that. But I looked around me and I see others who didn't have to struggle as hard. I don't know. But beyond that, not much more. I love doing the show, as I said, because now when people see me coming, they're on their best behavior. Who else? Who's got another question?
Mr. Quinones, thank you for all of the stories that you shared. I was wondering, as you look back at your life's work, is there one story that changed your life?
That's a good one. I think the sewer kids in Colombia, I mean, this was I love doing stories. Often reporters get stories from the newspaper or they get ideas from it being done somewhere else, right? So they'll read it in the New York Times and then ABC News will do a story. So we're more reactive than proactive. And that story I'm very proud of because we discovered it. I saw the children going into the manhole covers, dirty and with sleeves that would sniff glue by day and get high to escape their terrible conditions. So I think going down there and looking at, can you imagine in the sewers by the rivers of waste, the waste of, 12 million people in Bogota, Colombia, and having to live along those rivers underneath the catacombs of Bogota. I think that definitely changed my life and reminded me that those are the kinds of stories we got to keep looking for and giving a voice to people who don't have a voice. Because those kids, no one was listening to them. The government wanted to obliterate them. They wanted to clean up the streets. That, I think, was one of the most memorable ones. But there have been many. I was in in Florida when covering the Space Shuttle Challenger. I was telling somebody here from the Challenger School this morning. And I was there interviewing Krista McAuliffe's parents. Remember, she was the school teacher that went up in the Challenger and died during that explosion with those other astronauts. You know, being there, watching it go up, watching the faces of her parents so proud and full of joy, and then suddenly their faces turn to confusion because they've said there's been a malfunction in the air, and then utter shock as they realize that they've lost their daughter along with these other astronauts. That story, I mean, shook me so much that I had to go on the air 2 minutes later and again talk to Peter Jennings. And I was teary-eyed and I couldn't talk. I mean, I just witnessed the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger right before my eyes. And Peter telling me, young man, you know, you're gonna have to pull yourself together. Those stories leave such a mark. You know, I was in Panama when General Noriega was being sought after by President Bush, and the Noriega forces took over the Marriott Hotel where all the journalists were staying, and they raided the hotel and took 40 journalists hostage, including my producer. The night before, we had spent under my bed, you know, scared to death, thinking with soldiers with guns going to every room, pulling people out. We just never opened our door, and we kept it locked. Those kinds of stories, I think, stay with you forever. So I think there's been a number of stories like that. Anyone else? Other questions? Yes, yes, sir.
Yes, you talked about an interesting story that you did, the Yanomamo in the Amazon. Can you tell us a little bit about that? That kind of primitive group versus modern society, infringing on them?
There are very few places in the world, right, where people haven't been discovered. But we found, thanks to Napoleon Chagnon, was the author of a book called The Fierce People, the Yanomamo. And he had visited other tribes in the Amazon. And I read in the New York Times that he was going to go back because the Venezuelan military had spotted a village from the air. There were no roads to this little village, deep in the heart along the border of Venezuela and Brazil. And there are no roads or rivers to this village. So they were pretty certain that they had not been visited by the outside world. So this professor from the University of Southern California was going in, and they were going to equip a helicopter with extra fuel tanks because no plane could land there. There were no roads, no rivers, and only by helicopter could you get there. And it was so deep that you needed extra fuel tanks on the chopper. So he was going to go. So I called him right away, and I said, can we go with you? Can we hitch a ride on your helicopter? We'll pay for the fuel. And ABC said yes, and there was a big chopper, thank God. And we all flew in on this Venezuelan military helicopter into this place. And indeed, they had no idea who the hell we were, where we came from. As the chopper was landed, they shot arrows at the chopper. And when we landed, they started petting the chopper, calling it the word they have for a big parrot. They literally thought this was a bird of some sort. And we spent a week sleeping in their donut-shaped dwellings where 300 people live in hammocks next to each other. A lot of, as I remember, a lot of snoring going on there. But I interviewed the chief, thanks to Napoleon, who spoke the language, and he was a translator. And I gave the chief a recording of Vivaldi, so he listened to symphonic music for the first time ever. So he's got it to his ear, and his eyes are wide open. He's saying, what is this? What am I hearing? He thought there were beautiful animal sounds, and it was violins and pianos. They traded everything, so I showed him dollar bills, and I said, look, if I gave you this $20 bill, would you give me your bow and arrow? And he looked at me like I was from outer space. You know, said, what was I to do with a piece of paper, you know? Now, if you give me your shirt, he said, I'll give you my... So there's a guy down there wearing a New York Yankees t-shirt, and I've got a bow and arrow. And then I showed him pictures, postcards from big cities like New York and Caracas, Venezuela. And I said, this is where we live, you know. What do you think of this in these tall buildings? he was just in utter shock. He said, that's scary. I don't think I could ever live there. So it was fascinating. I loved being there for a whole week. I don't know that we would ever do that there will be that kind of encounter again, because everything, it seems, has been discovered. But I was one of the last ones and the first ones to visit that place. I loved it. It was wonderful. And I still love it. I can't wait to do more stories like that. Yes?
Good morning. Thank you for your speech. That was very nice. I have a question. As you know, this is the 50th anniversary for the I Have a Dream speech that Dr. Martin Luther King gave years back. My question is related to stories that seem maybe not so relevant, like inequality and race, things that we sometimes say we are past in some viewers' eyes and so forth. How do you get, as you mentioned, we're in Peoria, Arizona, in Peoria, Illinois are small spheres. How do you get your story told, or a story that you're passionate about? Specifically, I'm interested in equalities in STEM. I'm a woman in computing. So how do you get that story to someone when those stories seem to be like from 1964 and continuing?
I know. You have to have a willing listening ear. And often, people aren't listening. The media, and I can say this, too often now, does tabloid stories, celebrity stories, and we don't care enough about stories like that. Peter Jennings would be, I think, turning over in his grave if he saw some of the stuff that's on television these days. So having said that, people are still willing to hear good stories. And you start by telling it to your local newspaper, your local TV station, your local radio station. That's where we often hear it from, because we can't hear it in New York unless it's been broadcast somewhere else. Now, if we know each other personally, I can give you my card, you can send me the idea, and I can pitch it to ABC News. But I can't be everywhere, and not every reporter can be everywhere. So I think generally you start with the local newspaper, the local radio station that might care. Talk to their news director. Everyone has a news director, an editor, and pitch it to them as eloquently as you can. And by the way, Martin Luther King, I know I just spoke at the anniversary of his death a couple of weeks ago, and it's like a motto for what would you do. It was Martin Luther King who said, "Our lives begin to end the moment we stay silent about things that matter." In the end, that's what would you do is all about, isn't it? Not staying silent about things that matter. I think we're out of, well, okay, one more? Yeah.
Out of curiosity, what was the main spark or the interest that started your idea to start what would you do?
That started what?
That started the show.
Oh, we had read, there was a columnist who wrote a column in New York, in the New York Times. His name is Randy Cohen, called The Ethicist. And The Ethicist was about all these dilemmas that we face. And every week or so, he would write about dilemmas we face and how people react to them. And I think that was the seed that made us want to do it for television. The column that I wrote had to do with nannies. What would you do if you're at a park and you see the nanny who's supposed to be taking care of these kids ignoring them? A young girl who's on texting or listening to her iPod or on the phone, and meanwhile the child that she's supposed to be taking care of is out running near traffic. What do you do? How do you get in touch with their mother? How do you sound the alarm? So when we saw that column, that was our first what would you do? It was about nannies. So we had an actress play the part of a nanny who was totally neglecting the child. The child was an actor, and of course we had security there to make sure that she didn't run into the street, but pretending to be ignoring the child. And other mothers, you should have seen the way they reacted. It was wonderful and inspiring. And that's the beauty of our show. You do have people who don't do anything, don't step up, but in every scenario, along comes a hero who sometimes at risk to themselves will sound the alarm and does something totally heroic, and it restores your faith in humanity. That's why I love doing this show. It'll be back May 29th at 9 p.m. Arizona time.